Morning. This is 7 minutes to 8 GMT in the morning of Sunday, the 30th of August, 2020. Whenever you are watching this or wherever you are watching this, this is coming to you from East London in the United Kingdom. And this is being presented by Muhammad Haque, and it is the KhoodeelaarTV channel, which is one of the consequences of the lockdown. Although as a publishing platform, we have been publishing for much longer and more extensively than is available even through a broadcast. So this is called the Diagnosis of Fleet Street. The media, that is printed media, published from London, and the word Fleet Street is one word or two words depending on how you are using it. If it's a hashtag, then it's one word. But if it is two words, then it is, of course, without the hashtag and in the conventional pre-internet eras. Fleet Street is the name of the street, which is actually itself named after the river that flows under it. It's a small river parallel to the River Thames, which is much wider and much deeper. And Fleet Street is the street where most of the newspapers had their offices for a long time. And so the word or words Fleet Street is associated with the London-based English language newspapers of UK. And the predominant assumption underlying the editorial line and the editorial view of the world is Little English. It does not recognize the existence of the world. It assumes that Britannia rules the waves, and rule Britannia, Britannia rule, which is the theme of the Little Englander. And that is what the Fleet Street newspapers, although they have got their premises now away from Fleet Street itself, there is hardly any of the titles published from Fleet Street as such. But the theme is the same as it was when all these papers, or most of them, were based in Fleet Street. Fleet Street, for those who are not in the UK or have not come to the UK or have not visited London, is only 100 years or so away from the Christian cathedral, St. Paul's Cathedral, the Anglican Church. And on the other side, the other end is Strand, the Strand, where the High Court buildings exists. And then there is Bush House in the Strand, where the BBC used to have their operational headquarters for propaganda on behalf of the Little England message given by the BBC on the World Service, so-called. And I renamed the World Service as the World Disservice, because the BBC was, in a sophisticated way, telling lies to the world about Britain and British intentions and British behavior and policies. By British, I mean the government, the state controlled by the people who are mostly not known, not held to account, and most of the ordinary people in Britain, so-called indigenous people in the context of migration rhetoric and semantics, mostly white people, are kept as gullible zombies to be fed lies by the ruling apparatus and apparatchiks. And they have been unaltered in their attitude, even after having to, quote, lose the empire. There is hardly anything left of the empire except the worst kind of legacies like racism and imperialism and in the mindset, which is why the whole of Fleet Street, that is the Daily Mail, the Daily Boris Graph for the last 10 years at least, and the Rupert Murdoch's The Scum, and the Daily Express, which is left behind as a legacy of lying by Beaverbrook, the Canadian magnate who was a friend of Winston Churchill's and who was a complete accomplished liar. And the Daily Express remains as completely lying, dishonest outlet now as it was 100 years ago, 90 years ago, 80 years ago. And so when I say the diagnosis, that is what I mean. I'm not going to repeat, and it cannot be done by repeating the headlines and the contents. I'm going to examine the contents, and not every single word, not most of the headlines, but contextually, evidentially, the main thrust of the main orientation, the propensities to lie and to disinform. There is a tendency that there is fake news about because of Facebook and others, and only because of Facebook and other outlets because of internet. That is not true. Fleet Street has been lying and faking for hundreds of years. And this is the original crux and the core of the thesis that I am representing here and presenting here. And that is not something that can be available anywhere. If there is, then I would like to know, and I'd like to, quote, compare notes. So far, I haven't seen any. And that when I say I haven't seen any, I include Chomsky, Mr. Noam Chomsky as well. He hasn't done anything. Not Ken Loach in the context of the British theatre and drama and plays, and the notice that he has been receiving as the original campaigning filmmaker and commentator in that way. So I'm presenting something here on this channel in a kind of new setting. But this thesis I've been presenting for a very long time. So the platform has kind of been added. This internet online platform has been added, but the theory, the analysis, the diagnosis originally has been ongoing for a very long time. In fact, I began by focusing a very long time ago on the contents and the role of the BBC, the broadcasting, not print paper, because I was doing this from abroad, from the international perspective, where I was at the receiving end of the broadcasting lies on the BBC. I was contrasting, comparing, and examining the contents of the BBC's lies and misinterpretations with the evidence on the ground where I was. One of the accomplished liars of the BBC, or through the BBC, one of the, like there have been hundreds of liars, one of the most accomplished BBC liars has been Mark Tully. Mark Tully is a racist, apart from anything else. And his biography says that he was born in India, or Calcutta, whatever. But that is not my concern where he was born. The concern is the contents of his lying. And the evidence of Tully's lies are all over the place now after he has, quote, retired or has been kind of decommissioned. So Mark Tully is one liar, and he lied about the whole of the subcontinent and the religion, the history of the empire and everything. And his kind of corresponding, similar compared to Tully, liar, was Michael Elkin. Michael Elkin was wailing from Jerusalem. And he wailed for a very long time from Jerusalem. And he lied and he lied and he lied. So the BBC was the original liar that I had to kind of act on by starting the diagnosis a very long time ago because of these liars. And not just Mark Tully and Michael Elkin. There was a man from the USA, Alistair Cook's letter from America. I mean, this is like this version I'm presenting could be the kind of part of the reply to Alistair Cook's letter from America. This is the letter from London and the contents of Alistair Cook's racist confections. So all of those liars were fakers. They were suppressing the truth and they were presenting a biased view to the world, to the broadcast. And that is in a kind of printed way available or is fostered through the press called the Fleet Street newspapers. So the papers today are shortly to be, I'm going to put this one by one first, and then we'll be going through some of the main immorality, the cruelty, and the corruption, and the digressions, and the diversions, and the pretexting that these papers are doing. But there is this Sunday People, £1.80 in London, in the pound sterling. This is about the, obviously it speaks for itself, the contents about TikTok app scorecards glorify gang stabbings to kids. Now that is absolutely tip of the iceberg. This is not an exceptional item. The culture of violence being perpetuated and the violence being glorified by the various platforms in the media, various apps on the internet is mushrooming and it's growing. And this violence and the criminality and the lying and the attacks and the crimes are uncontrolled and they're not acted on and they're not being kind of held to account by the so-called states that are supposed to be in existence to protect the people, including, of course, the children. And the stabbing of children, as has been clarified here, it is happening more often, more frequently, more widespread than is evident in a piece like this. And the Sunday People, which is a sister title to the Sunday Mirror or the Daily Mirror, it's the Mirror Group newspapers, which for a number of years were owned by the big pension crook, Robert Maxwell. And these papers, the Sunday People and the Mirror, they pretend to be not as bad, as racist, as corrupt as the Daily Mail or the Scum or the Express, but they are, because there is no original mainstream coverage in these papers, Sunday People included, of what goes on in society every day, every week. And that is the only way. If they wanted to stop these violence against children or against anybody. Children, of course, are specially to be protected, but other targets of violence must be protected too. And the narrative is based essentially on exceptional events. Like this is being shown as an exceptional event, but this is not true. The TikTok is a new entrant from China to the market, and the older and existing operators like Facebook and YouTube and others have been as unaccountable as TikTok. And in Britain, in the so-called Mother of Parliament, that is in the House of Commons, select committee of MPs looking at the media. But it is absolutely pathetic. It is, for a significant period, it was fronted by Damian Collins, and before him, it was fronted by a kind of Brexiteer. And these people kind of capitulate, ingratiate themselves to the big tech giants, as they're called. So they tickle them. They don't actually hold them to account. The only attempts made to hold these to account were through the European Union, which the British right wing has taken UK out of. And because the EU began to take some action on the various very unacceptable, antisocial, criminal, corrupt behavior by the tech giants, these tech giants facilitated attacks on the EU. And Brexit was the biggest opportunity they used. So the Facebook is accused, widely accused, of having interfered with the referendum and with the propaganda for Britain being taken out of the EU. Now, this is an ongoing issue. It has not been resolved. And the reason why it hasn't been resolved is because the British members of Parliament generally are absolute stooges. British members of Parliament with tiny numbers who are not stooges most of the times, but essentially most of the British members of Parliament are stooges. And I give an example to show how complete the stooging is. Kenneth Clarke, who I politically had to confront in the context of campaigning for educational rights and against racism in 1992 over the school called Stratford School in East London. Not Stratford School in Shakespeare's country in the Midlands, but Stratford School in the London Borough of Newham. And that school became the center of an engagement between myself and Kenneth Clarke as the Cabinet Minister for Education in John Major's cabinet in 1992. And I became involved because Fleet Street, which I'm diagnosing now, Sunday's Fleet Street was beginning through the London Evening, quote, no standard, to paint a parent of a school called Stratford School as a Muslim kind of extremist, which he never was and he never could be. And I'll come to that in a second. When I noticed that was happening, I had no option but to intervene. And I intervened as duly constituted, elected, campaigning leader and organizer of the London Collective of Black Governors, LCBG. And the London Collective of Black Governors issued a statement saying that the painting of the parent as a kind of Muslim parent rather than a parent was racially motivated and it was not founded on the evidence. And then I got the coverage in the local London-based London regional and news television channels like BBC, what was called Newsroom Southeast, and its counterpart ITV London. And that then propelled the issue to a more central position, to a point where Kenneth Clark and others got involved in issuing directives and statements condemning the parents and condemning and opposing and criticizing what I was doing. What I did in 1992 in that engagement actually has been vindicated, and everything I have been doing campaigning-wise has been vindicated, because my motive has not been to profit personally or make a career or make a money or anything. My motive has always been and remains to promote the idea of the truth based on evidence, universally, morally, objectively, transparently, verifiably. So when I said to the people who were attacking the parent that they were being racist, obviously it was resisted, because the racists would never accept that they were doing anything with a racist motive, but they did. The essential, now that is now what, 28 years ago, exactly the 28 years ago that I had done the broadcast on Channel 4 news slot asking John Major and the leaders of the so-called Western governments to take action to end poverty at the origins of these countries in Africa and Asia, from where migrants were heading for refuges and peaceful and economic kind of safety and security in the West. So what happened at the Stratford School, which is not situated very far from the Stratford that became notorious over the 2012 kind of games charade, was absolutely prophetic and based on solid evidence that all the experiences of parents and children and thinkers, objective thinkers, have been supportive of, not supportive of me, but supportive of the actual analysis that I was presenting at that early stage. And I shall come to the detailed discussion of the Stratford School engagement with Kenneth Clark and others. Now, Kenneth Clark, I mentioned it, this diagnosis of the media has been painted to suit his purpose, and I'm sure with no lack of encouragement from him, as a kind of not right-wing, ultra-right Tory, but as a kind of moderate Tory. Now, let me say this. There is no such thing as a moderate Tory. Tory, by definition, is against the environment. Tory, by definition, is against ordinary people sharing in the resources of the nation. The wealth of nations, Adam Smith's wealth of nation, has been looted and robbed and stolen by the Tories, or via the Tories, or by the Tories, or by Tories in other names, like the Lib Dems, who colluded with the Tories of Cameron et al. In 2010 to 2015, and they gave the Tories extra fillip, extra kind of spirit to loot the wealth of the nation and to further impoverish and make poorer the poor people, the people in low income and in people in bad housing, poor housing, and no housing. And the impact of all these adverse impact on the people in this country who are of African or Asian origin or descent has been magnified many times as compared to their, quote, native white counterparts and neighbors. But essentially, there are at this stage, at this date, 30th of August 2020, anything between 10 to 15 million people in low income, in various stages of poverty and various stages of deprivation. And the Daily Mirror's kind of Sunday sister paper, the Sunday People, is not examining the causes or the roots, ROUTEs, the channels, the roots, the roads of how the Tories make millions of people poor and keep them poor. And there is a well-organized pattern, well-organized system whereby the Tories make people poor and keep people in poverty. And one of the essential weapons they use is the media's complicity and collusion. That is to say that the media refuses, and Fleet Street refuses to give credibility to the most credible, most authentic evidence, but it refuses to give credibility because of the line it or editorially follows. And the line is essentially Tory. The people, this story is not exposing anything weak in the premiership of Boris Johnson. In fact, this is the current season, and the season is China. It's not about, although it says that the item is about sickening, glorifying of attacks on children, which is emotionally very appealing, but the motive of the Sunday People is not that. It is to add pressure against China, which is now the enemy foreigner party or power in the kind of arrangement of Donald Trump and Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is an agent of Donald Trump, so, or an extension of Donald Trump. And so therefore that is fine. You know, they're doing this without any fear or any prospect of being branded as anti-Tory. So that's the diagnosis. If glorifying the stabbing of babies and children is sickening, then so is the suppressing of the whole truth about the glorifying of racism by Boris Johnson and the targeting of targets of racist hate and propaganda. So the Sunday People is not calling racists sickening. It should. Glorifying violence on children is sickening and must be stopped. But the Sunday People is not showing that kind of contempt and outrage against racist being glorified. And so therefore there is no evidence that the people, this is the inside kind of detail of this front page story about TikTok sickening, glorifying violence of violence on children. And now there is this piece about the care homes And this is about the lack of money that nursing homes are suffering from. And it says that they have asked for money to be given to them by the Boris Johnson cabinet minister for, or in the name of health, Matt Hancock. And there is a piece about bailiffs. Bailiffs are the licensed thugs that are used to terrorize people in debt and poverty, and they're sending daily texts harassing debtors during the COVID and pandemic crisis. And therefore, it warrants being kind of challenged on this. Does the mirror group actually cover poverty and the experience of the people pushed in poverty and kept in poverty? No, it doesn't. This is only a one-off thing. And the Sunday People is also part of the racist trendies who are celebrating post facto the first black superhero who died this week. The Chadwick Boseman, who was the star in the Black Panther film, but they never, contrary to their suggestion this week, they're oozing praise, or they're staging oozing praise of this Black Panther actor. But this is only because they're being trendy and topical because of the Black Lives Matter campaign that has begun from America because of the orchestrated program of massacring Black activists and campaigners that has been given the license and go ahead under Trump. And so what I'm saying is the Sunday People is not consistent with the slogan that it is sickened by violence. It is not. It does not cover racist violence as a norm. It only does that when it suits itself to exploit and to harvest and to hijack a campaign moment that has been created in this instance by the people who organized the Black Lives Matter campaign in the USA after the latest significant evidence of brazen police agenda to murder Black people. Now here, over to the Mail on Sunday, they are continuing the program, the right-wing program. They're not satisfied with the BBC, which has been playing complicit role propagating for the likes of the Daily Mail and the Mail Group and supporting Brexiteering lies for the last 5 years. The Mail Group wants the BBC kind of converted into a racist, ultra-right-wing kind of platform and outlet. And that is what they're saying, that this story, top Tory, is not a top Tory only. He has got other interests supporting this campaign. And they're saying that Rupert Murdoch, as I said in the previous comment on the Rule Britannia Rule, is planning to launch news channel in wake of Rule Britannia debacle. So Rupert Murdoch is not only not stopping his racist, ultra-racist role, he is even making it more outrageous and more brazen. And he's launching a news channel in this country, which will be like the Fox channel in America, which he controls and which has been singularly, most persistently, daily, 24 hours a day, propagating racist hatred and justifying racist murders and massacres and violence. So that is what Murdoch is going to do as well. And the pair of commentators, David Blunkett, a proven liar and racist, and David Mello, a proven liar and crook. These are given platforms to have a go at the BBC as well, not the BBC as a pliant surrogate and propagandist for the rights and the racists, but the idea of a national broadcaster, public service broadcaster. When they attack the BBC, they don't attack the BBC when it is racist. They attack the BBC when it appears even slightly to be behaving as a responsible public service broadcaster, as opposed to a racist broadcaster. And the Mail on Sunday is the kind of Sunday equivalent of what used to be the news of the world in terms of the political distortions. And all the millions of people who buy these papers are kind of fed this set of lies, the fakery and the distortions and the untruths and the mistruths. And they buy them and they swallow them and they accordingly behave. For example, on the day of the Brexit result, when the Brexit result in June 2016 was published and confirmed, immediately, within minutes, Asian people and people who looked like Muslims because of the headgear, and Sikhs, who many of them, because of the turban and the beard, kind of to the ignorant zombies, look like Muslims. These people came under attack various parts of England after the immediate result of the Brexit so-called referendum. So it's not like a theory, it's not like a hypothesis. It was happening on the streets. And we were saying that Brexit was a racist propaganda platform, not anything to do with getting Britain back in control of its affairs. Absolute rubbish. The only thing they wanted to control was to have no monitoring of its racist behavior. That's what they wanted to control. And it is evident every day that that is what their motivation is. And what is happening here in the Mail on Sunday, which is not bothered about poverty, not bothered about housing, and in fact, it is condemning, or it is carrying the line that condemns the Interior Minister, Priti Patel, who is a courier, who is an emblem, who is a flag carrier of the most right-wing extremist, racist, hostile, anti-migrant kind of policy. So even her bad racist behavior and policies are being dismissed as not enough by the right wing, by the racists that are getting the line in the Mail on Sunday, which is saying that there have not been enough deportations of the migrants. It's like saying that enough innocent people have not been sent to jail, or enough innocent people have not been convicted. That is the nearest outrageous immorality that I can kind of draw an example or parallel to or illustrate by that phrase. And the Mail on Sunday specializes in fake news and faking the facts. And the fakery is done by pretending to be genuine. Everything emotionally very much on the surface. And anything that is emotionally on the surface is grabbed hold of by the Daily Mail. And they exploit the zombies, people who are absolutely gullible. That is why I call them the gullible people in Britain, the kind of, what is it called? The indigenous. It's a race-related term, but that is the term that most aptly expresses. And the reason why the emotional blackmailing, emotional exploitation of the target is important is because it affects the lives and welfare of millions of people. If they're misinformed and if they act on misinformation, then the very life is at stake. And that is what is happening with the kind of various policy failures and various acts of starving the health service or health response to the pandemic, which is only representative of the failure across the board beyond and before the pandemic. The National Health Service was being the essential service parts of the NHS were being starved for years, for decades. The only people who benefited and are benefiting from the billions that are supposedly being spent in public health are the contractors, the big contractors, the big pharma companies. So the health service idea, National Health Service idea, has been already hijacked by the anti-National Health Service agenda couriers and agenda pushers. And the contractors are in collusion with the consultants, the kind of close-knit group of exploiters. They have never been held to account for the billions that they pocket every year, for the looting of the money that is supposed to be for the provision of health service at the point of need. It has never been done. It has never been the case. And the newspapers never examine that. They never examine that. And nor do the so-called kind of Thatcherites. Like, during Thatcher's time, there was a so-called economist called Skidelsky. Now, these over-promoted experts and advisors were lying. They were not telling the truth. And the lying about the NHS or against the idea of an NHS, against the idea of a welfare state, against the idea of a socially just and caring state have been coming to the fore during the pandemonium government that is fronted by Boris Johnson during the pandemic. And everything is collapsing. Why there has been such a large number of U-turns is because of what I've just said has been happening. Because the claims by the state or by the governments, successive governments, that they were caring for the community, they are caring for the people, they are protecting the British from invasion by the migrants. These are all coming apart, falling apart because they are not. And the migrants have never been anything but the protectors of the interests of society, because most migrants actually keep the most essential services going. This is an absolutely essential kind of fact and the truth. And the papers don't say that. Like the item saying that not enough migrants are being deported. It's like saying not enough, as I said, not enough healthy people have been kind of condemned to suffer. I mean, this is the illogicality and stupidity that put together every day on every major issue constitutes what I have been calling darkness, the Brexiteering darkness. They don't want the due process. They don't want fair access to fair hearing. They don't want fair income for everyone. They don't want an end to racism. They don't want the compliance with the international treaties and charters and declarations and conventions. They want back to the place where they were empire, and they ruled the waves. That's what I started. And so therefore they're saying that Patel is not punishing enough innocent people. And that is the sickness of the Mail on Sunday as a glimpse. And the Mail on Sunday has got 2 pages, pages 36 and 37. And this woman, Caroline Graham, who says that she has been living there for 30 years in Los Angeles. And she is saying that the violence in America is now getting personal. Now, this is contradicting the line that it follows about condemning Priti Patel for not punishing enough migrants, enough innocent people. Because the violence that she is apparently deploring and is alarmed by, apparently, the violence is directly the consequence of the violent agenda of hatred against the so-called migrants and other people. And the Mail on Sunday doesn't connect the two. And that is the sickness of the Mail on Sunday. And then we're talking about all of those even before we got to Dan Hodges. Dan Hodges, biologically, is the son of the actress Glenda Jackson. Apart from saying that I don't want to have any more reference to their link because I cannot show any evidence that in any way Dan Hodges writes or thinks what he does as a result of his being the son of Glenda Jackson. But that is a personal, biographical note to put him in the context. So he is now chosen London, and he is describing London as the dying city. Now, I could have told Dan Hodges long time ago that Sadiq Khan, the mayor, who is wrongly celebrated by many people who think that he's the good model of an immigrant son. Now, I say to them that stop doing that because he is no model of anything. Sadiq Khan is an opportunist, selfish, careerist political, and his agenda is very petty. Now, he is unfit to be in post not only of any mayor, because the mayor post itself is corrupt and corrupting, but he is unfit for any post because he showed when he was first appointed, when he was an MP in the years where Gordon Brown was kind of by default prime minister, after Sadiq Khan got a ministerial post as an undersecretary or something, his first noticeable public comment was that Muslims were to blame for the anti-Muslim kind of stereotype. That's how I'm putting it. So he's an idiot. He's not only an idiot, but he is also a criminal, because that was a lie that gave credence to serious, violent hatred of Muslims. So that's what I'm saying. That is where Sadiq Khan committed a crime, and he has not been held to account for that. And Dan Hodges will never hold Sadiq Khan responsible for any such thing, because Dan Hodges, in fact, would want Sadiq Khan to be more anti-Muslim than Sadiq Khan he is already. And the rest of the mail on Sunday is typical propaganda for the right-wing various elements, including the corrupt Brexiteering conman and member of the House of Peers called Ashcroft. Ashcroft is one of the craftiest crooks, big business operatives in Britain. And he is a racist, and he is corrupting society without any response from the Labour Party. Now, this is the Observer, which, since it was taken over by the Guardian group, has become, let's say, accurately describable as the Guardian in print on Sunday. And this is the front page about the kind of public opinion poll that they have conducted. And it shows that Johnson is losing public support. And there are other items in the Observer that are neither original nor rigorous, nor do they actually investigate the incidents of racist attacks on people. In this case, they are talking about far right using virus as excuse to attack Asians. There's a hate crime item that they have run, but their actual kind of target of the far right is the Chinese people, because of what I said. Trump and others have targeted China as a wider policy option, rather than for the sake of the people in whose defense they are allegedly hacking these propaganda items. This is not a real investigation by the observer into the day-to-day racist attacks that are taking place not only in the streets but at every level in society in Britain. So that's what I said about the Guardian on Sunday, that is the Observer. And the Guardian is tickling, it tickles. It doesn't actually hold to account and it is running a story about the migrant children. And it's a typical Guardian type piece that doesn't go far into the depth of the racist attacks and violence being perpetrated under any excuse at every stage. And it is doing a propaganda here for local councils, which is what the Guardian has been doing for years. It doesn't hold the local councils accountable for anything. And it pits the local councils, quote, against the central government, especially when it's the Conservative or Tory central government, as if the local councils are representing the downtrodden local communities. That could not be further from the truth. Local councils are actually in denial of their duties at every stage. And it's the local councils that are perpetrating and perpetuating the main agenda of racist central government in this country. And it applies to the piece that the Observer is running, apparently saying that the local councils are under pressure from Priti Patel to rush the assessment of children, migrant applicants. And the implication being that the councils are not being given fair opportunities and nor fair resources. But this is absolutely misleading, because the councils are not making the case against racist policies. This is to do with the resources. This is to do with the time that they have or not. This is not about upholding the charter obligations, the declarations, the conventions, the treaty obligations. So when I said about Kenneth Clarke being not a moderate Tory, I meant that his ideological allegiances are very much to the same forces, to the same agenda that the so-called far right or right-wing Tories have adhered to. And everything that Kenneth Clarke has done as an MP has been to support the right-wing agenda and the right-wing narrative, the explanations, the justifications, his speeches. And his speeches always, when he was supposedly quoting the publicity from the kind of so-called anti-Brexiteers by being one of the speakers against the Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Gove and others, he made sure that he never supported the Labour Party. And he made sure that he condemned Corbyn more than he condemned the Brexiteering Johnson and others brigades. So he presented himself as a kind of wet, moderate Tory, but he never was against the Tory ideology. And the same applies to Michael Heseltine. Heseltine got hold of several prime time media television spots during at least 2 years of a campaign against Boris Johnson and the Jacob Rees-Mogg and other right-wingers in the Conservative Party. But he always made sure to say that it will be Corbyn coming in. So he used Corbyn as a scare, kind of not as somebody who supported the opposition to the Conservative kind of lunacy and irrationality and racism. So there we shall be taking the break, in the sense that we shall continue this diagnosis in the next part. And until that time, this part is ending at 8:54 GMT in the morning of Sunday, the 30th of August 2020. And in the next part, we shall be talking about the anniversary of the passing of the rebel poet Qazi Nazrul Islam, and why it is important as a reference in the context of the diagnosis of the British press on Sunday, the 30th of August 2020. I shall be explaining all of that in the next part.